Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to the Executive Career Chat. I'm Lisa Rangel with Chameleon Resumes. I'm so excited that you're here with us today. Just to introduce everyone is on the screen, Krista McDonald's with our team at Chameleon. So if you have any questions, problems, know of somebody who's having trouble getting in, just email her at krista@chameleonresumes.com. And our guest, Max Hansen of Y Scouts, co-founder of Y Scouts. I'm super thrilled that you are here with us today. Max and I are going to be talking about how top recruiters actually find executive candidates. And I know this is a topic that should not be a mystery to executives, but it often is. And he is going to give us a peek behind the curtain, essentially, on what him and his team do at Y Scouts, and give us some insights on how we can do that. I don't normally read bios, Max, but I love yours. So if you don't mind, I'm going to read just like two pieces of it, if that's okay, because I think it'll give everyone a context of what we're going to talk about here today. So Max Hansen is a veteran executive recruiter, co-founder of Y Scouts, the award-winning search firm redefining how companies hire leaders. Driven by a belief that leaders should be purpose aligned and culturally resonant, Max co founded Y Scouts to transform the hiring process from a resume exchange to a mission driven partnership. I just want everybody to remember that. He and his team have developed a neuroscience-backed model for identifying values-aligned leaders and later co-authored Hiring on Purpose, a breakthrough book in the recruitment industry. Under Max's leadership, Y Scouts has become the go-to firm for forward-thinking companies, earning national recognition from Forbes and being named one of North America's top recruiting firms this year, 2025. So go to yscouts.com. That's where you're going to find everything that Max and his team do. But I wanted to read that because there is a yearning, I think, amongst leaders to be purposefully aligned with their company. And it's not just box checking things on a resume. And I say that as a resume writer. So thank you so much for being here with us today. And I hope that sets a proper stage for what we're going to talk about here.
Thanks for having me. I have to say, Lisa was on the Built on Purpose podcast, and traditionally, I wasn't a huge fan of resume writers, but what I learned is she's not your typical resume writer. So this is going to be a fun conversation because there's so much alignment in what we both believe and how candidates should show up and how the resume should be written, and then how we interpret that and take them through the vetting process. So this will be fun.
Well, thank you. And thanks for having me on your show as well. That was great. Recordings available on YouTube, right? Spotify, all the things. Um, and yes, there'll be a replay. We're recording it now. So, sit back, listen, knowing that you can gather notes and watch it again if you need to. So when we had our first chat and, even when I was on your show, what I really found so fascinating was that you don't post ads and you have a process that you pretty much embark upon to find the talent that your client companies want. Why don't you maybe go through a little bit of that beginning process? Like, how do you find candidates? Because I thought it was really different than what I've heard from other search firms and other recruiters.
Yeah, so I think I would start even going back before that, just so people understand like how we got to this process. And by the way, Career Builder and Monster just filed bankruptcy, so there's no question in my mind that the job posting process is a bit broken. But so over the years, starting in January 2002, I actually started my first recruiting company, had great teams. We hired about 50,000 people. And so that's when we started to figure out that, hey, this isn't working. I think everybody knows a story or has been part of a story, whether it been as a candidate or as a hiring manager, where you post a job and somebody has the perfect resume, and then they get in the interview and they say everything they needed to say. Then they get in there and then it doesn't work out and they can't do a lot of the things that they say they can do. And so then they are, let go. And then both parties are unhappy because they didn't get, what they wanted. And so I'm breaking this down to like the most fundamental level, but we saw this play out so many times. One of the other co-founder of Y Scouts, his name is Brian Moore, great guy, still one of my closest friends. He actually worked at Jobbing, which was a job board, and
Mhm.
so he had worked there. And one of our first things we were thinking about Y Scouts is like, how do we do this different? And keep in mind, I will say the thing that was unique for us is that we had another business. When I started Y Scouts, I had a company called Job Brokers and TruePath that was doing very well. So again, I'm just giving credit to all the pieces that helped us put this together. So it allowed us to really start, kind of testing stuff to see if it would
Hmm.
work. So the
Right.
first thing we decided is not to post jobs because we felt like what was happening, and it's now happening more than ever because of AI, was that people were gamifying the interview process too much.
Right.
And kind of rewriting the resumes and kind of telling you what they think you want to hear and embellishing their what they can do. And so we just decided to remove that completely and then take it even a couple steps further. So when we reach out to candidates, we take them through what's called covert discovery. So they don't know the role or the company. We reach out, like to give you an idea how that sounds and looks, is we reach out to candidates and let them know that we're retaining an exclusive by a company that cares so much about the complete alignment around culture and competencies that we want to take them through a discovery process to learn more about them before we get into the details of the role and company to save them time, which is all true because we feel like by understanding who they are, their strengths, their weaknesses, what they want, the values they never compromise on the front end before they know what we actually want to hear, it's just that much easier. So that conversation for us is super unique, super fun, and it does take when you think about it, people think, especially traditional recruiters or people that maybe are doing talent acquisition, they're like,
Mm.
wow, that must take a lot of time. It does take a little bit more time on the front end, but if you think about it, you'll figure out who's aligned to the role, and in the later stages, so you may spend 30 minutes with somebody. I'd rather spend 30 minutes with a bunch of people and know which ones are super aligned on all kind of the soft skills
Right.
and hard skills, and then focus on the others, the stuff on the ones that are most aligned. So that's kind of how we think about it, is like we just want authentic answers, and we want to make sure that the people give, they default to telling us the truth. They feel
Right.
good in that process, and so that's kind of what we've always done, and it's we see really good results from it.
I love your interview process. And before we get to that, share with me maybe some of the tactics that you use to even start developing the list of people you initially reach out to. How do you go about finding the people to put them through this process?
Yeah, so I mean, it's as of late too, especially with pieces of technology, everybody's coming more and more findable, which is good. I think for everybody that is looking for work, as long as you're getting your resume up in some places, you're going to be findable. But so the way we think about it is, it all starts with going through role visioning with our client,
Mm-hmm.
figuring out what they really need this person to achieve, and
Mm-hmm.
specifically achieve in the first 12 months of their role. I know that
Right.
sounds a little short-sighted for people, and they're like, well, they're leadership roles. Of course, we want them to succeed longer, but the first 12 months is really important because you have to make sure the company's got to make sure that they know exactly what they want. So once we figure that out, we call that an opportunity profile, same thing as a
Mm-hmm.
job description.
Right.
Uh, and then from that, we start figuring out the ideal candidate profile and the search strategy. So we figure out those pieces before we even start reaching out to anybody, which is counterintuitive to some people because I think a lot of hiring managers think, well, I'm going to start reaching out to people and they're going to help me figure out what I'm looking for because they're at the most senior level. We kind of think about it a little bit different. So we'll go figure out the companies, most of these companies, they are interested in finding people outside of their industry. I mean, they'll look at
Right. I
people.
thought that was fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like almost like a three-pronged approach. It's like, of course, we're going to look at people that have direct industry experience. They could be a good fit. Then you think about people with adjacent industries, and then you think about
Mm-hmm.
people, outside of that even. So that'd be a third group. So we'll start reaching out to people by targeting specific companies that may have, some similarities. A lot of times it has to do
What
with
type of similarities, though?
like
You know
like
where I'm going with this. I
yeah.
think you do. And if not, I'll say it, what you told me. But go ahead. I want you to
Uh,
say
uh, a lot
it.
of time, yeah, one of the things that's prevalent a lot of times is they look for somebody that's taken a company from where they're at to where they want to go. So, if
Hmm.
it's a $20 million company and they want to get to 40, I mean, they're really interested in the person that has taken somebody from that ride from 20 million to 40. So we'll go do research and go find
Right.
companies that were at that stage, and we'll go find the people that were in those roles.
Bingo.
And so it's targeting those companies the roles, finding the people's names that were in those roles, which is a lot of pieces of tools to do that,
Hmm.
and then finding their contact information, and then we'll reach out to them and reach out, ask if they want to go through that covert process.
And, I thought that was awesome because it's searching for people who demonstrate outcomes.
Yes.
And then people have to be able to sell that story once you reach out to them, right? So it's not enough to have done it. If you're finding a bunch of people have done it, now you need to sell yourself amongst A-level players who have done it also. And so how do you find the one with the best value alignment or, other types of alignment? But what that's the part that I really want to drive home is because people sometimes feel like they're not getting found.
Mm.
And when you're looking and you're coming up with, say, a list of 50 people that meet somewhat a lot of that outcome criteria, what makes people findable in your world? Like besides the list, what makes them makes your team to want to talk to them once they've been found because of your research about the company behavior?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes down to like resumes, simple, like to the point resumes.
Hmm.
I would say tenure still does matter a bit, but
Hmm.
can be overcome if there's, a good story and you're honest about it.
Right,
Um, but growth is important. A lot of times, we happen to focus on a lot of fast growth companies.
right.
We have many companies that call us and like, hey, we just want a leader to come kind of flatline this thing. Like they always want a leader that's like, where they're seeing growth. So we want to see a pattern of companies that have seen growth,
Hmm.
whatever period of time that they were in. So those are, some of the things that we look at. And then, when we take our companies, our clients through their process, we call it org
Hmm.
DNA on their end. So we're asking them about, tell us about kind of what your values look like
Hmm.
in action. And so we're
Right.
kind of learning that. So when we take the person through that covert process and we're actually asking them about values they'd never compromise, we'll see some sort of overlap in, kind of their styles, and that will get us to want to move them to, uh,
Hmm.
to the next, kind of phase. They're in looking for, there's obviously experience in, how many people that they lead in functional area. All that obviously matters a lot as well. But the soft skills, so the hard skills are kind of like that will get that's what we're looking for. That's what will get them in the first interview. And then we
Right.
evaluate the soft skills through that covert discovery process. And then the second interview, the deep dive, we'll go much more into the specific experience that they had around the success outcomes.
You had mentioned to me when we were doing some prep for this, like three leadership behaviors. Is that something you look for in this second piece of the evaluation?
Yeah, so when we started Y Scouts back in 2012, we had a neuroscientist work with us, and one thing we were really interested in, probably over the top, like to a certain extent where it probably wasn't even healthy, was we we take a lot of pride in being a leadership search firm, which means that we need to identify people that are true leaders. And we even went through a phase where even the industry, executive search to us,
Right.
like I don't really like that term because or executive leaders, like
Hmm.
we believe that not every executive is a leader. And so we
Right.
went down this path of like, what do the best leaders look like today on earth? And this is our opinion, but it's backed by
Right.
a lot of science. And the three things that we look for as we're taking people through that covert discovery and as we're taking them through, kind of the deep dive is we're looking for proof points and elevated behaviors around being a relentless learner, developing
Hmm.
others, and driving results.
Right.
And those three things are really important. And while simple, they are, but they're also, a good framework to see through as you start to evaluate leaders to make sure that they, have those traits and have proof points in those areas.
Now, I'm getting some questions in the chat, like what if, are you seeing this at the Fortune 500 level? Just fast moving startups? Like, obviously this type of hiring isn't going to be suitable at every company, but like, are you seeing it in certain levels or are you seeing it across the board, just certain types of companies?
I mean, it's we see it across the board. I
Hmm.
would say more and more companies. in this day and age. Now, our sweet spot is like the 50 to 250 million fast growth companies, but
Right.
we work with multi-billion dollar companies as well. And there are a lot, I don't think I could just say as a trend, the Fortune 100, they don't look for those things. I think I think depending on who the company is, I think that they do look for, these things. I think these three things we believe are really what are the separators of like average leaders to good leaders.
Right.
Especially the drive results piece is a little bit more objective because a lot of the times what we're asking, and this may be good to know as a candidate and a job seeker, is if you're going through a really good interview process, they should be asking like, where was the company when you got there, and where
Hmm.
was it, maybe when you left? And so
Right.
they want to see a trend of like growth, that this person has gone in there and helped grow. And if they haven't, just being very honest about like, maybe it was something, obviously that they you can't always control growth in companies. There's industry stuff, there's economic
Hmm.
stuff. But really talking about those and having those and the opposite. So let's start talking about like the things that go against the grain that don't go with the leadership model is leaders that have kind of a command and control, which I think is kind of a fading type of leadership style,
Right.
but they're more know-it-alls versus relentless learners, engaging with their team to
Hmm.
kind of get ideas and drive them home and helping them choose kind of what to focus on, and then developing the others. Obviously it's just a trait when you ask, leaders, um, talk about the people that you helped along the way. I mean, it's very
Hmm.
easy for them to talk about the people that they've mentored and, helped get promoted along the way. And so those are the types of folks that we're really, very interested in. And I think a lot of these companies are across the board, all the way through the Fortune 50, are people that have gone out of their way to help people continue to develop. Because I think the number one job of leaders is to create other leaders. And if you're
Exactly. Yeah.
any company, like you want to see that somebody has not only had the bandwidth to drive what they needed to do on their desk, but also help other people advance in their leadership journey as well.
Well, one of the things we talked about in preparing was that, holding people accountable is probably one of the most in-demand skills because ultimately nobody either likes doing it or many people aren't good at it, right? So if you are good at that and don't mind doing it, you're going to be in demand if you can articulate it properly, right? So,
Yeah, I 100% agree. Yeah, I'm a kind of a more visionary. I've always held people accountable, but it's more been because I kind of had to because that's what the company needed.
right,
Interesting because we handle a lot of second in command COO searches.
right.
It, it almost always, I mean, it goes across the whole C-suite, but holding people accountable is a very much needed thing at most companies. And
Hmm.
the other thing from an interview standpoint, a lot of times the questions that will be asked around holding people accountable is, tell me how you've performance
Hmm.
managed. How did you hold people accountable? And hearing, even about how they had to let people go. It's one of the hardest things a
Right.
leader will ever do. And that's the hardest part of being a leader. But
So,
asking the story about it and how they handled it is really something that
right.
helps us glean into who they really are.
So I've had two people in the chat comments about this, and I'm going to ask you your opinion on something.
Sure.
The comment is generally like, people, that's not my experience about 95% or, the high percentage of companies being open to outside industries. They're seeing that, they'll spend time doing a fit assessment and then only to be told at the end, oh, they want somebody with experience from the industry. I know when I recruited what that was code for. I
You,
don't know if I should be blunt about it and see if you agree or don't agree, but why do recruiters go through a whole assessment only to then say at the end, oh, they want somebody from within the industry when they knew from the start they didn't have the industry experience?
yeah, I mean, I see, we were talking about this before. I see less companies directing us to go directly to their own industry,
Right.
especially at the C level, because most of the time they've been well insulated with, their C-suite or a bunch of people that have industry experience. So this
Mm,
company's been in that industry for many years. And if they're looking for some sort of, elevation or transformation, they feel like they've seen a lot of the folks in their industry,
right,
even bigger industry, and they like to find somebody that has some experience out of their industry. And it's not a binary thing either. I think that's what we have to realize, and I think people do, is for us as recruiters and hiring managers in general,
mm,
beautiful thing about people's background is like somebody that has exposure to the industry is great.
mm,
Had exposure to a couple other industries that maybe have some synergies. Like a lot of times, somebody, I'm just using this as an example, but if
right,
somebody's in like a more traditional, mundane like type of industry, and they have somebody that has that experience in that industry, but also has worked maybe in tech or SaaS and has gone and figured out how to use technology to help them advance stuff a little bit faster,
right.
it's a good fit. So I don't think it's I wouldn't say it's always an either or because people can build, experience at multiple places. And that's a
Right.
beautiful part of our jobs, I guess, as recruiters and hiring managers in finding somebody that might have a bit of exposure to that industry and then also brings, a whole new experience from a couple other industries.
So I'm gonna be blunt then, because I think everything you just said was on point, accurate. Not that you need me to tell you that, but I'm just saying I agree
Right.
with you. But I always tell candidates that if you get feedback that you're not being moved forward because of something they knew from the start,
Yeah.
then you're basically probably they believe that you're not going to be a fit, and they're instead of being direct about it, they're picking the thing that is the least likely fact that can be disputed. It's a cop out. It's
Yeah.
a cop out.
Oh, yeah.
Like, or you almost didn't pass what they think is the fit test. And it's arbitrary. I'm not saying it's something anybody should stake their personal worth on, but I feel that when you go through a whole process, it could be three interviews, it could be an assessment period. And if they say something at the end of like, oh, we're looking for somebody who's bilingual Spanish and you're not bilingual Spanish, and they knew that from the first interview, then
Right.
you know what I
Yeah.
mean? There's probably another reason you're not getting moved forward and they're not being upfront about it.
Yeah. I mean,
You see that
usually it's,
happening.
oh yeah, we see that happening. I mean,
Yeah.
in our jobs, obviously, we like to eliminate as
And
much of
it's
that
not
as
necessarily
possible.
nefarious. You know what I mean? It's just people are awkward and giving bad news. You know?
Yeah, yeah. I think that what's interesting is in in the world of retained search, and then just in recruiting in general. So
Mhm.
I won't even limit it to retained search. I think just getting back to candidates to let them know that they didn't get the job, period. You don't have to give them a reason. You're
Yeah.
already like 90% better than most people out there, and I
Isn't
think
that the
that's
truth? Yeah.
terrible. Because it's like you took the time to reach out to this person. They took the time to go through this process.
Hmm.
Going back and declining and saying, "Hey, this position's been filled,"
Right.
is like that should be the normal. And the crazy part, it's not. So like we
Right.
go back and do that, and the candidates that don't get it, they're just grateful that you've given them the right news. But I think you're right. So the code, somebody I think asked in the things. I think the code is that they ended up interviewing with a person that's just like, hey, I don't jive with this person. It's more of a personality conflict, and
Right.
probably nothing this person could have done different.
Yeah.
And so that's the code word. Just instead of saying, hey, like I didn't like their personality or I don't think I jive with them, they go
Hmm.
find like an unfixable flaw that could have been, probably, could have been no, you could have seen it in the very beginning. So
I mean,
yeah,
it's hard not to take it personally, but I usually like just try to say like the universe is telling you they're not your people, you know? And you gotta go find your
yeah.
people, you know?
I mean, I will say from the standpoint of the recruiting and the relationship with like the clients that we represent,
Right.
we try to spend as much time. We talk to them on a weekly basis, and we have
Hmm.
up, and we're trying to make sure that doesn't happen as much as possible. But sometimes at the end of the day, the client will change their mind on something that just won't click, and to your point. it's probably just as good that they figure that out with the candidate so they don't have to get in there and the candidate doesn't have
Yeah.
to be like, I don't like this person either.
And right, you want to, as disappointing it as it is, you want to find out before you start that that's a thing for them, right? Versus, after it's already signed and you started. But, we've had a couple of questions that lead to one of the points that I know you and I talked about that I thought was fantastic, and I want to make sure we bring it up. With regards to your interview piece, your interview process, it's easy to say be honest, right? I mean, like, because first of all, who's gonna, in theory, choose not to be honest? But when you need something or you're looking for something, or um, it can sometimes be compromised, even if your intention is not to. When you have gaps and you have consulting assignments and interim gigs, and because everybody's got to pay the bills in between things, right? What's your take on how to present that? And what is, in your one recruiter's lens, you're certainly not representative of all of them, but like, how is it generally viewed, and or how do you view it when somebody has sort of a nonlinear background?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just needs to be addressed. And I think the other thing, and honest, like confident, like if you took time off, you took time off. In fact, I
Hmm.
think some hiring managers may actually respect the fact that you're like, no, this job ended because of these reasons, I took 3 months off and I went, on vacation or stayed home and like spent some time with my kids. Me personally, a lot of hiring managers I know would be like, okay, that checks out. And like, that's the type of person I want working with me. But I think addressing them directly and not trying to cover them up with all this consulting stuff, I think is
Right.
always the best way to go about it.
The honesty, I think, it will inadvertently help with recruiters like you that do values assessments, right? Because how you handle the difficult periods of your background, and or just non-traditional, right? It may not be difficult, but traditional, um, I think shows how you demonstrate non-traditional or difficult situations at work, right? Are you honest? Are you sheepish? Are you trying to play it up like it's different than what it is? Are you ashamed of it, even though there's nothing to be ashamed about? Like, I think sometimes how you handle the difficult parts of the interview can reflect how you'll handle difficult parts of the job.
Yeah, 100%. I think somebody mentioned, what Inspire really was consulting. Like, oh, of course, put that on there and talk about it. I have a bias for action. I got to be honest, like just as a person, like I totally respect people taking off. I've got 5 kids, so when people are like, "Hey, I went and focused on this," I'm like, "Great!" Like that's probably
God bless,
like we're
right?
all just walking each other home at the end of the day. And if the company that you're, interviewing with, they don't see life the same way, maybe you shouldn't be working there anyway. But if you've truly consulted, I like that on there. And then
Hmm.
I like to understand, kind of what type of consulting that they did. I think an easy way, you and I might have talked about this, an easy way to, I guess, I don't even think you need to protect your resume. So maybe this language is a little strong, but
Yeah,
anytime you get into a role, like maybe you're super overqualified for, but it's like something you're interested in, or you have like, some company you're going to help. I think putting the word intern before your title, kind of is a nice way of, kind of protecting yourself from somebody being
hmm,
like, oh, you work for this in this, big C-level role, and then moved into this smaller business and, it doesn't really make sense. Well,
right,
I like people that take action and continue to move forward. And, so, and it's also okay to wait. I mean, if you have the financial wherewithal and you've got saved money and you can go through a gap where you're trying to find your next thing, well, that's cool too. Just talk about it. And then I think as far as in LinkedIn, I think somebody asked, do you put that on, with the time off? I don't think you have
right.
to put that time off. I think when somebody you get in the conversation, just be ready to tell your story because I think any good recruiter is going to walk through, kind of your timeline and kind of figure
Right.
out where what you did and why the gaps are there. And if you have a good reason for it and everything else lines up, then I don't, we don't have much problem with it.
So you mentioned good reason. So what would be, in your mind, classified as bad reasons? And how do people handle that? Because people have bad reasons. and
Yeah.
bad is, I say that with quotes around it, but
I think people that are unprepared when they're asked about it and they kind of stumble and kind of talk around and, like they feel like you can kind of tell when somebody's trying to fill it in with like something
right,
that might not have been. So it's more the hesitation involved and kind of how you talk about it. I mean, some people have sick family members. Like,
right.
well, if some company is going to count that against you, then like you don't even want to work for that company. I'd hate to
Yeah.
be so blunt, but like
No,
let's be
exactly.
real.
And even
You
if you've been fired or laid off, I mean that happens to people, right? I mean, I
100%.
I loved how you said, and I just want to reemphasize this point. I don't really think there is a bad reason, you know? I mean, but don't get me wrong. I know some reasons are harder than others, but I think anytime any question that you hope they don't ask or your stomach sinks when they ask, that's the exact question you need to be the most prepared for because that's what you said. It's about being prepared for it. If you stumble, if you're sheepish, if you inadvertently have body language that conveys shame, I mean, like, I don't care if went to rehab for 6 months. Like, there's nothing bad, right? Like, I mean, there's going to be people who have a problem with whatever reason you have for your gap. There's always going to be those people because someone in the chat said, well, if you have a good reason, like, you're spending time with your family, and what if it's a bad reason, like a layoff or a firing? There's going to be people who think taking time off with your family is not good. Like
Right.
everything is relative. So it's about, I think, being very prepared and confident in where you stand, because then if they have a problem with it, they've just demonstrated they're not your people. Like, and there's always, I think it's accepting that there will always be people who don't like your choices.
Yeah, no, I would 100% agree. I think being comfortable with who you are, addressing it directly on whatever it was, maybe you got fired, maybe, there was a layoff, stuff like that. I think addressing it, there's
Yeah, like
the
what'd
way,
you learn from it? Like what you're trying to avoid the next time. Like, now I know not to work for a place like this. Are you like this? Great, you're not for me, right?
I think that,
We don't want to
and I think
repeat that behavior.
I think I'm just trying to give some nuggets to people, so that I think what happens is when somebody starts to try to talk
Right,
around something, not direct, they start to like, use a lot more words in order to describe something that could be
right,
described and that's where I think that's where interviewers start to get a little set off and like, that didn't sound right. Like,
right.
sometimes they're kind of talking around the issue versus saying like it was a layoff. There was, this many people laid off. The company was going through financial problems and, and then moved on. Whatever it might be. I'm just using that as an example. But I think
Yeah,
just being direct and honest and in interviewing in general, one thing that I asked my team before I went on this, just like, hey, what do we like? Am I missing some? Give me some nuggets of like when we're interviewing somebody, what do we look for? Like, what are the main things we're looking for? And
right.
it is simple to the point, answers to our questions because we have a deep dive interview, maybe have an hour. There's a lot
Yeah,
of questions that we have to get to, and we're asking for specific data points and things, and we need, we want answers to them so we can present it back to our clients about the full picture of it. And so when candidates are super long-winded, sometimes that makes it difficult. And I have to admit, sometimes if they're way too long-winded, you would hope that you could go back and ask questions, but sometimes you don't have the opportunity to do that because the client can look at it as, hey, you were able to do that with all the other candidates. How come you weren't able to do that with, the candidate, with this particular candidate? And we, as recruiters, we take as much, criticism and feedback on that area as possible. But sometimes the clients are, pretty strict on, well,
right.
we didn't get enough data points in the interview.
The when you're, and I think I just want to also drill in a little bit more, and not at risk of sounding repetitive, but you bring up, the strength and honesty, and I think that comes across as like a leadership competence, that where you're confident in who you are. And the whether that's online presence, whether it's interview speaking, skills, or the physical branding of like the documents, the profile, the resume or whatnot, like where do you see mistakes that people make that are essentially inadvertently conveying that they're not confident or they're not being honest, not so much that they're lying, but they're just not being honest with themselves. And people sense that, like what are some of the mistakes you see candidates make that make you want to pass and it has nothing to do with their credentials?
I mean, sometimes because we're in this era where there's so much remote work, I
Hmm.
think there's always an innocent technical problem of like,
Right.
getting on. But that's usually not a great sign, especially at the senior level, which then we only work at the senior level, which, having difficulty like getting in a Zoom video, or will it be Teams, which I'm not a big fan of Teams because I use Zoom, so I'm
Yeah.
sure. Yes. But like those little things can be bigger things, because if one honest mistake's good, but if that kind of happens, multiple times, or like, or
Right.
schedule, or not following up, or not, having some issue with the invite, like little things, or just, you kind of got to look at it like this is a person at the most senior level.
Right.
Uh, and then, and then again, I think it just comes down to clarity, like being able to answer questions very directly in simple terms with as few words as possible and being confident. Another thing we talked about this is I think humor goes a long way. One of our values at our company, and I'll tell you why this matters in context of this, is
Right.
consultative sincerity. And so a lot of times our clients will listen to us, even if there's been gaps in our resume, and it's not perfect and they're not from the industry, that they will let us go to bat for candidates and be like, hey, we really like this person because of X, Y, and Z. They were super clear in kind of what they wanted. We like their background, here. They were, had a great sense of humor. We think you would jive with them. Like all these things do matter. And so that's
Right.
what's fun about our jobs when we're retaining the exclusive, is that our clients or they want us to go to them and say, hey, you probably wouldn't see this person as a fit if you just looked at their resume,
Right.
but we interview and we want you to meet them. So there's a lot of opportunity, I think, for to really shine once you're in an interview by just being yourself. And so I think those are the pitfalls, is just when somebody's trying to be somebody that they're not. And I like, you and I talked about this. We like people who, and so do our clients, we like people who are very clear on what it is they want and what it is they don't want.
Right.
Even if it's not perfectly aligned, I'd rather somebody that's not trying to fit in and, to every single thing and agreeable to everything. I'd like somebody that's a little bit more, kind of confident in kind of what it is they want and what they don't want. Even if that's not perfectly aligned, it's
Hmm.
like wondering like, well, this person said everything I kind of wanted to hear, and I didn't really get anything where like they're actually taking a stance on something. So uh,
Hmm.
I think that's important to realize, is like just be yourself, and like, tell them what you want and what it is you don't want. And they'll either respect that or not, but more times they'll respect it, more so than, giving them everything they want to hear.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because when I recruited, and while it was a while ago, I go to recruiting conferences still and talk to recruiters often, and I feel like this is still a thing on some level, but like I've always said I'm suspect of perfect. And it just means I haven't figured out what your shtick is, and I don't say that with any, again, with no negativity, but like we all got a shtick. I can tell you mine, Krista can probably tell you mine after working for me for 5 years. We all have a thing, right? Like we all have our imperfections, our quirks. And when things are too perfect, it almost seems a little like too canned. And if I feel like if people want humans to hire them, they have to be human, right? They have to show their imperfections. Or, I find that how people handle mistakes on an interview show me more about them than any answer that they can rehearse, right? Because like, are they blaming somebody? Are they pretending it didn't exist? Are they like laughing at themselves? Like just things like that, right? Like, um, like somebody asked, if they're, what values are important, is humor over, humor's not overseen over humor is not ahead of integrity, of course not, but you do need to make people feel like it's easy to work with you, right? Like that's so like I think that's some of but I think how you handle the mistakes and how you let your guard down and be politically or not politically diplomatically vulnerable. Like you need to be diplomatic. It's not a therapy session, but you still need to be vulnerable, and then so handling that like diplomatic vulnerability, I always think is like a good way to just
Yeah,
be human.
I think somebody asked about talking about weaknesses. I think talking about weaknesses is important. I think what's more important is you being very clear that you've reflected on that weakness and what you've learned from it.
Hmm.
So, like you basically, disarm it in a way. I mean, everybody has weaknesses. In fact, that's one of the things that I'd say is if, two candidates are equal side by side and somebody's trying to make a decision, which happens a lot,
Hmm.
and they're like, man, this person just like has never talked about any weaknesses. And one candidate's, had no problem talking about, hey, this is where I've had weaknesses. This is what I've learned, reflected on. This is what I've learned. And here's
Hmm.
how I show up moving forward. I think that's the best way to answer that. I think that there's there are, in my opinion, below the belt interview questions. And I'll share one of those with you.
Yeah, yeah, let's do it.
Uh, it's a question around the lines of what is how do they word it? What is the one thing that let me think about this. Um, it's like what is the one thing that most people um, say that it'd be that is wrong with you? And it's bad wording, but they're basically setting you up so anything you say is basically confirming that everybody thinks this way about you.
Right,
And so I would say when somebody sets yourself up, I wish I could think about the wording better. Then it kind of that's one of the questions where you kind of just have to avoid and just say, hey, I don't know that I don't have any of those things. I don't know
right,
how to answer things. But there are a few questions that I think are below the belt when they ask like questions that pin you in to everybody. Oh, what's a wrongful assumption that everybody has about you? That's the
right.
question.
That's an
That's a
interesting
question where you're
question.
like, it's a hard one because you
Or maybe you
answer.
can go, you go first, and then I'll go next.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You got to disarm it. You have to do something along those lines. I will say, for nuggets of in the interview process, just so I kind of don't forget, because I was thinking about sharing this because I get to talk to clients more so than I get to talk to candidates. And my team talks a lot to candidates, but I think the one of the things at the end of the interview when they ask about, what questions do you have? I mean, this is the time where like it is time to shine. Like this is all things equal. This is where like somebody with a way better resume than you that
Right,
doesn't do a good job in this and you do, and you've just like catapulted yourself to to the top of the list. Definitely asking curious questions because I think this is
hmm,
what you start to learn when somebody asks a question where it's like a question where it's almost like them proving that they know something, they're a know-it-all, like asking this question.
right,
It's a question, but it's like proving how much information like they know. I think really asking curious, good questions, having a list of those ahead of time. No question is a dumb question. And then I think one of the questions that I think is a good way to answer is one of the questions is like as a candidate is to say, all right, so you ask a couple questions. One of the last questions is, let's say from a year from now, you hired
hmm,
me, I've succeeded and we've succeeded together. Explain exactly, what happened and kind of why that would be. Questions like that, because
hmm,
so now you're putting them into the future if you've already been successful in the role, and now
right,
you're asking them to give the reasons of, all those reasons why. So I think there's some good questions like that
right.
um, help hiring managers kind of think through like, wow, they're already thinking through what was successful about the role. And I think always asking, because I don't think companies do a great job about this, asking specific questions about how that person that is interviewing them, how they thrive in the culture and what they like about the culture and what they like
Yeah,
about the company. like all those questions, like this is all the information you really want to know. And I think when people genuinely ask those and ask it with a very curious, kind of posturing, I think they stand out a lot more than people that are asking know-it-all questions.
Yeah, and I think finding out like why people, this is outside of the once you pass the recruiter, like why people joined, if they've just joined, what made them choose this, if they just joined, if they've been there 20 years, like how they've seen the company change and what makes them stay. Like that's a body language question, man. You can tell if they're phoning it in or they're being really genuine based on how they answer. Nobody's going to say like, "Oh, they don't do anything to keep me," but you can tell with their body language if they do nothing to keep them, you know. So
Yeah.
I love the curiosity questions and not necessarily all the performative questions to show how qualified you are, right? Like that's the difference. It's subtle, but it's huge. It's when you're asking more about the job and less about proving, I think that can also subtly send a message that you're curious versus like looking for approval.
Yeah, and somebody asked I think the repeat to that question, but it's putting them in the future of saying, hey, let's say I got the job, I accepted, I started, and we're 6 months down the road. Like, what are some of the, what are some of the things that went right, or what are this, even what are going to be some of the challenges that we'd run into together, stuff like that.
Hmm.
I think are good questions because again, I think from a mentality of it puts the interviewer in the position of you already being in the company successful, and now you're asking a question looking back. So that was
Hmm.
kind of, I think somebody asked about that question again.
And part of this, and thanks for repeating that, because part of this is also you as an executive demonstrating your ability to think on your feet, right? Like you're not going to be able to prepare for everything. I mean, you should definitely be prepared, but you should be prepared to such a degree that when you have to ad lib it or you have to wing it, that you're coming from a place of preparedness and not from a place of panic, you know? But you're never going to be prepared for everything.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think one of the things you mentioned earlier, what I love about this new like remote workplace is
Hmm.
that this is me personally. So I'm not saying this is for everybody.
Right, right.
If my 7-year-old accidentally walks in here right now, like in the old days, that would be like a huge faux pas. In this day and age, anybody that has kids would be like, oh, just like me, they got kids. You know what I mean? It's
Right.
more like and you just got to roll with it because how people handle that, I'm kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, I'd loved how they
No,
handle that.
I once had a client, it was a client, not an interview situation, but a client say that they were on an interview and their elderly parent that they took care of was like moaning, and they were fine. Nobody was ignoring them, but that's just what they do. And it was hard to, you still need to keep them within earshot, but and it was like that's a hard thing to contend with, right? Like kids are cute, right? So that's sometimes they're not, even if they're intrusive, they're cute, right? Sometimes when you're dealing with really difficult situations at home, um, it's hard to have the balance. But if you have an employer that's going to be like, yeah, okay, no big deal, you're doing things and it's fine, but like again, like if there's only so much preparedness and performative work we can do, at some point you just got to be you. And if it's a problem, because somebody had a question like, how can you do this without being derailed from the candidacy? And granted, there's always reasons you should not be derailed from your candidacy that are outright illegal, and nobody's saying that that's okay, ever. But if you say that like oh, my email is my to-do list and that's a company that does that frowns upon email and does everything on Slack and Notion, well maybe it isn't the worst thing that you didn't get hired because your adjustment level would be way too hard, right? So like, so be honest before you get in the company that is using Slack and Notion and now you're like, no, please everybody send it to me via email, right? So like, at some point you have to own who you are and like you said earlier, take a stand at something. Doesn't mean you can't change or learn, but at least show that you can take a stand at something. And I think that's when you start to show your individuality and you're not just phoning in answers that you hope everybody wants to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I think another thing that kind of stands out as me is like something to be aware of, and I'm sure most people are, but making the process of like the whole reference piece, making it easy for
Hmm.
the interviewer, getting like talking about because they'll typically depends on the interview style, but just being like ready. I mean, even if you could, and I don't know if this is for everybody can do this,
Hmm.
but even reaching out and letting obviously the person know ahead of time that somebody's reaching out to do a reference, all this stuff like the readiness, the preparedness of like of the right references, like the person they truly work for, because any good interviewer is always going
Right.
to let them go for that. So you might as well just have all that ready. So I always think about like those pieces too. A lot of times people are doing it on the back end, but I think really many wise folks that are in the interview
Hmm.
start asking questions about people that they directly work for, and they start asking, like, what would they say about what you could have done better during your tenure with them? And so
Hmm.
being honest about that's important because when they do a reference, they're going to ask the person the same thing, and they're going to say, "Hey, when this person worked for you, they said that, maybe they weren't as organized as they could have been and they were working on it." And so like you have to make sure that I think from the reference standpoint, you think that through and you're aware of the conversations and just make sure that you're, pretty much just saying it the way it was.
Right.
I
And
mean,
that just comes back to like telling the truth diplomatically. It's again, it's not a therapy session, right? You don't need to be so overt about everything, but I do think it's important to be truthful. I do want to touch on something that it's sort of an abrupt move here that we're going to do because we talked about virtual interviewing skills, right? And I know that sometimes I get people who are like, if I can just get in front of somebody, I can sell it, but they struggle with this scenario, despite us being in this scenario now for definitely a good 5, 6 years. What are some of the things that you see as a red flag or a problem or that people should be fixing in order to have a better presence that show their competency?
yeah, I mean, I think the lowest hanging fruit is, being in a well-lit environment and the environment you can control.
Hmm.
But I also think again, I'm talking about leadership roles, so I don't want everybody to freak out. But I think being able to make videos, and I think there's a lot of like,
Right,
communication that happens, and being comfortable, and communicating, by Zoom and by video.
right.
Like sometimes, like I start realizing the best way to communicate with people is to make them a video. Like if they're the type of person that doesn't really love email, like I might text them a video. Maybe after an
Right,
interview, if you've picked up in the interview process that this person, like they don't somehow it comes up that they get thousands of emails. Well, I might send them a thank you, a short video and text it
yeah,
to them. This is like sending another email into their box that they said they dread getting into. But I think at the leadership level, and by the way, another thing we do, and I know some people may like this or not, we record our interviews and then we make it like a highlight reel so the person can see when we're talking specifically about the success outcomes and key responsibilities that
hmm,
are most important for the role. And
right.
so how able to articulate themselves and present themselves is super important. And it's just part of, I used to joke around and say, hey, I'm a lot cooler in person than I am on Zoom. Well, that's kind of funny, but like you're not going to go very far, in my opinion. I've had to, kind of learn to get more comfortable, like in this setting,
Yeah, same, same.
than normal. But yeah, it's definitely super important how you are able to just communicate, through video and all the formats, text,
Right.
email, all that. Like you got to figure that piece out on like what the person's preferences are and communicating that style to them.
It's again, like if a company uses these tools, right? If you're managing a team in Sweden, in Korea, and in Brazil, you're going to do this on Zoom, on Slack, you have to be able to work asynchronously. Like if if your interviewing process is demonstrating an asynchronous type of communication, video, one-way video, conversational video, and you can't articulate your positions and your directions accordingly on the interview, well, they're going to think you're going to struggle in the actual organization as well. So how you interview, how you job search, is how you do the rest of it too, from a recruiter standpoint, I think too. And I think that's important to say. The what if we have like 6 minutes left, and I was like, so I could talk to you for hours. But what do you feel like we haven't touched on that we should? But
Um,
I really do think
mm,
we did everything. But I know we've had some questions just going back to how the best advice for how to find people, because that's really, I think, where a lot of people struggle is just getting found.
got it. I think just addressing how do people respond to
Oh, you
video.
saw that. Okay, great. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's less and less of an issue. I mean, right, wrong, or indifferent. Again, no judgment. Like I have a note taker in every single one of my like conversations.
Hmm.
I have a personal one, just the way I've kind of set it up, and then we
Yeah.
also record our Zooms. They're on auto record, and so in this day and age, yeah, it might be a challenge for people. That might be a red flag if somebody's like, "Hey, I'm not willing to be interviewed or record the interview."
Right.
Not saying right, wrong, or indifferent. That's anybody's choice. But I think it's become normalized now towards like, hey, what do you have to hide? And we're recording this because we're using it to take notes. We're using it, for all the right reasons. For me, it allows me to focus on the conversation so I don't have to take notes, is why my
Right.
fireflies be in a meeting. But being found, I mean, obviously it's important. I mean, LinkedIn, I will say this, LinkedIn is a necessary evil. I mean, they've built an amazing company, but a lot of us recruiters, I don't know, we kind of feel like we've gotten pushed around by LinkedIn quite a bit, and maybe candidates feel the same way.
Oh, they
But I'm
definitely do. Yeah.
it's a necessary thing. I mean, update your profile. They change things every once in a while. Make sure you've gone in there and it looks good and it's appeasing and it's accurate. And there's descriptions on stuff. Especially if you're seeking a job, like kind of what you did, and it's got to present itself. It's got to be a good representation of who you are. Because there's a lot of real estate there that a lot of people don't use. And if you're looking for a job, you don't want to be too robust, but you kind of want enough information in there to really help somebody see who it is you are,
Hmm.
where you want to go, and where you've been. Like I almost look at like the resume is like we joke around like it's a rear view mirror of all the shit you don't want to do again, but
When
it's
it's
kind
written
of
poorly, yes.
yeah, yeah, it's kind of a joke. But when it's written right, as we all know, it articulates what you've been able to accomplish, kind of who you are, and kind of what you're looking to do.
Right.
So if all those things are on there, I think you have a much better chance of being found. I don't think like back in the day when it was only keyword match, like people would have to like put all these keywords in it and
Yeah.
like
The stuffing. Yeah.
that's those days are kind of gone. If you've got your title and the company and the links to the company and everything's working, you should be found relatively easy, and then go engage with recruiters that specialize kind of in either your function area or in your industry, and kind of
Hmm.
continue to meet people. And then also being found is also finding other people and researching and figuring out why you'd like to work for a company that maybe isn't an industry that you've been in before. I think
Hmm.
that always sparks a conversation, and people think like that doesn't necessarily work. I think it's a good way to get attention from somebody is like writing them, just simply saying, hey, I'm interested in this role because of X, Y, and Z, because I feel like I aligned your values because of X, Y, and Z. And it being simple and to the point of your reasoning for having interest in the company.
Right.
That's those are just kind of easy things to think about.
No, and I love that you just reiterated that this is an inside job. It's about being very clear on what you want and what you stand for, and then that attracts the people and the companies that want what you're selling then. When you're very nebulous and trying to be everything to everybody, it's hard to appeal to anything. And that's, I think, really what it comes down to. And thank you so much. People have asked, like, how can I get Y Scouts to find us? I'm like, go to yscouts.com, go through their assessment. You'll get a sense of everything of what Max was talking about here through that process. And I want to thank you so much for being here. This is really great. I know everybody got some stuff out of this, and we were blunt about what things are and what they aren't. And that's what everybody needs nowadays. It's really tough out there. So I really appreciate you sharing your secrets. And thank you,
Yeah, no,
Krista.
thanks for having me. When we first met, we saw eye to eye in a lot of stuff. It's like, not overcomplicate this. It's, you do the things right you can, and then just be yourself and be direct. And I think everything else will fall into place and will fall the way it should.
Yeah, no, it's good. You were great. And thank you, everybody, for carving out your time with us. I never take that for granted. Grateful that you were all here. And take care, everyone. Thank you.